And away we go. Well, tables have turned 180 degrees, sir. We met because you were doing a podcast, and
Yeah.
now you're a guest on mine. So welcome, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me, dude. I was stoked. Yeah, I was thinking about that today. That's probably been, if I had to guess, I would say what, like 8 or 9 years, maybe 8 years.
Getting up there, yeah, yeah, man. What did you
Yeah.
guys? What was it? Color Me Bloody?
Color Me Bloody.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's probably been 7 or 8 years, probably. Me and Alex, we had that MMA podcast, and you were the only ever fill-in co-host that we had.
that was actually the first podcast I was like kind of a. I mean, I was a fill-in co-host, but at the same time, in a way, kind of a guest on, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. This time I've done fucking hundreds of them, but that was my first. So thanks for taking my cherry, brother.
Yeah, dude, that was awesome. No, it was cool. I'm stoked to circle back. We've been talking about, you had a different podcast going, and then I had one that I still have, but I haven't recorded in a while. So it's nice to finally do this again. It's been a long time since we've talked, but we've kept in touch kind of over the years. So it's like a long time friend. I have a lot of people like that where it's like, with my lifestyle, where even though I don't see everybody and connect with everybody, it's like there's the people that you just are reminded of through the internet. You see their posts, you see their stuff, and it's like they're pretty much good friends after a while.
Yeah, man. Well, thanks for doing this. It's my birthday today, as
I know.
you found
Happy
out. So
birthday. That is
there may or allegedly there may be some bourbon in this mug.
Dude, I got done sober October, so I'm having a little bit myself.
Perfect. And I'm allegedly wearing pants, so we're good to go.
Hell yeah.
So I gotta say, like, when we talked before, I had no idea, and I mean, you're a comedian, so you're not going to take offense to this. I had no idea to know that you used to be a big fat ass, like that you used to be a gigantic
Yeah.
young man. And well, yeah, by the time I met you, like, you were powerlifting, you were fit, all of that. And dude, mad respect, because when we talked back then, you hadn't, like, you were an MMA fan. You loved it. I could tell, and you knew your shit, like, cerebrally, but you weren't training, you weren't doing all of that. And ever since, like, I watch videos of you choking motherfuckers out all the time. So congratulations, man. Well done.
Yeah. So when I was in high school, my peak was before senior year. I was 340 pounds. And yeah, and then kind of what led me to the powerlifting and lifting was when I got in shape. I just kept going down that road. And as you can tell over the years, you can tell I'm kind of an all-in sort of person, a bit extreme, kind of that addictive mindset. So of course, next thing you know, I went from just getting in shape to competitive powerlifting to being a strength and conditioning coach. And then I went from being the MMA fan to doing it. Well, the guy who was the co-host of that show, Alex, was a blue belt at the time, and he trained at an MMA gym. And I don't know if you remember this or not, but one of the kind of bits for the show was that we had a grappling thing where we grappled each other. And we had 3 grappling matches at his gym. And that was the first time I ever really did it. And then the gym that I'm now at, I interviewed a couple people from that gym, and I went there and I grappled, I think 2 different guys from that gym. And that was my entry to it. And it wasn't actually, as a matter of fact, at the way end of recording the podcast, I had just started doing jujitsu. So yeah, there was a little bit of an overlap, but yeah, it's been, just one thing at a time. And next thing you know, here I am. And you know what it's like. You don't ever see that kind of stuff happening. And then out of nowhere, it's just, you look back and you're like, geez, it's hard to imagine that when I was 26, I had never trained jujitsu or I'd never done anything like that. It's cool now, but just
Yeah,
builds
I
over
remember,
time.
like, I can actually remember the day. I was kind of like, I'd been looking at a couple of your posts and I was kind of marveling over that. And then I think it was like later that same day where you posted a picture of you in high school. And I was like, that's not even the same fucking human. Like, what's up there? So yeah, man, like, a lot of respect, that kind of, like, you can call it an addiction. Like I'm kind of the same way. So I get like the addictive nature and how that plays into it. But the discipline, the responsibility that it took for you to achieve all of that is, very inspiring and very admirable. And man, like mad props to you. I don't know what else to say other than that.
Dude, have you ever been like, what's the most overweight you think you've ever been?
I've always been like, even if I get fat, I'm still skinny fat. Like I'll get a bit of a belly, but
Yeah.
like I don't know, I'm a pretty naturally thin dude, so maybe 195 pounds, like overweight. Like I can get up to 195 pounds with muscle easy, but like 195 pounds with no muscle and a bit of a belly.
Yeah, weight is a weird thing, and this will probably make sense, and you've probably thought about it before. This is no shocker, but it's the easiest thing in the world typically, because it's rare that people are doing everything they can to lose weight or putting really any effort and not losing weight. It really doesn't take a whole lot of effort. And usually if you're very obese, it's very obvious why you're obese. And it's not like you even need to go to the gym, or you just typically need to eat less junk. Doesn't even need to be perfect. I've binged out on dessert, or like I've been doing intermittent fasting a lot, and I've lost considerable amount of weight, and I get to pig out a lot of nights. Obviously lifestyle helps that and stuff, but it's a really weird thing because I've had to work hard to get good at jujitsu. I mean, you learn a skill, you're trying to learn an instrument, or you do the music stuff, and that's a lot of work. But it's bizarre how hard it is to lose weight despite how easy it is to lose weight.
Yeah,
It
it's
really doesn't make sense.
well, it's such a mental game, right? Like it's about that discipline of cutting those extra calories, putting that extra work in every day, and making sure you stay on top of it, and not making excuses for yourself, because it's really easy to go like, oh, whatever, I'll just eat a pizza, I'll be fine. I'll go for an extra walk tomorrow. Your body doesn't work that way. um,
Yeah.
Things kind of pile on over time and gradually. So you've got to, if that's your goal, then you've got to stay disciplined to it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Is Canada as nearly obese as America is? Pretty similar, or no?
To be honest, I don't know statistically. I would assume no.
Yeah.
Just based on having been to both countries quite a bit, I would assume no, but it's not much better, if it's better at all.
Yeah, it's a weird thing because yeah, typically it comes with putting in a lot of work. Like usually when somebody does a transformation, they go from one extreme to the other, and that's kind of the nature of that beast. But at the end of the day, it's not even whether or not you eat the pizza, whether or not you eat the cookies. It's really just how much of it you're eating. Most of the time, it's just doing too much. It's literally less work to lose weight. I mean, a lot goes into being healthy. A lot goes into being in good shape and being strong and stuff like that. But it's really not that much. People make like you said, you can't have the excuses. You have to be willing to think that you can do it. So recently I just got done sober October, and I was smoking pot regularly or having a drink every night, doing something pretty much every night. And it was really it was so easy once I went to do it, but it was hard for me to convince myself that I would be able to do it. That's a weird part of it. And I'm a pretty empowered person. I imagine for the average person, it's even harder for them to tell themselves that they're going to be able to not eat the ice cream, to not continue down that path. That is real. That's a weird part of that's a human condition that is really bizarre to me. And eating is such a good example with it. It's not even like physically dependent in the same way like smoking cigarettes or something. It's not as obviously destructive, but as self-destructive as like drugs and other stuff. But it's bizarre because it's such a problem.
Absolutely. And yeah, dude, have you done, I know you've been competing the last few years. Have you done any actual weight cuts where like you need to do, I figure you probably competed heavyweight, so you don't need to worry too much about it, but
Yeah. So I'll tell you, my first MMA fight was at 205. And I actually walked into the cage at 229.
Oh,
So not only did I cut a considerable amount of fat leading up to the fight, because when I signed up to take the fight, I was a good bit above 229. I was like 260, maybe 262. And I don't know why, it's stupid. It doesn't even make any sense because a lot of light heavyweights could beat heavyweights ass anyway, but something about it, I just wanted to get down to the weight class and do all that. And then the water cut on top of it. The food cut wasn't terrible. But it probably affected my recovery as far as like the grueling side of an MMA fight camp. And I did something that was pretty stupid. I hadn't really trained any striking. I got my grappling good enough where I thought, oh, I'm probably good enough to do an MMA fight. I've grappled against a lot of amateur fighters. I grapple pretty well with them. Okay, let me just learn some striking. And then that should be more than enough to go out there and have my first fight, which isn't a bad thing per se, but I had never even really experienced a fight in the gym yet. I hadn't had any really hard sparring. I had sparred like 2 or 3 times and taken like 10 Muay Thai classes when I signed up. And I was officially like, I guess 13, 14 weeks out. So I had all this weight to lose and I had to tackle the idea of striking, that whole time. So I pretty much, when I'm in fight camp mode, I'm pretty much just boxing, a little bit of kickboxing, but I mean, I'm pretty much just preparing myself to get the striking side of things done, which then ironically, by the time fight time comes, all I've been doing is striking. And it's like, I get to choke people out every weekend. I do a competition. All I want to do is punch people now. So I'm this I understand what it's like to be the grappler who wants to go out there and what was it? Wang and Bang. Do you remember that?
yeah.
Andy Wang went out there and he's,
Yeah.
when you're a black, George Gurgel was kind of popular for it. You're this killer grappler, but you want to go out there and showcase your striking because you've never been able to do it. So it's a weird mind thing, but even now, even if I took another fight, I would probably still want to go out there and use my boxing. So
When I think of that, I actually think about Damian Maya because
yeah, he had that problem.
like when he got like literally elevated or levitated by Nate Marquardt. It's like yeah,
Brutal.
maybe just stick to what brought you to the dance. But yeah, I mean, I would totally get it. It would be the same thing like back when I used to do martial arts, it was all striking. Grappling wasn't even really a thing other than a little bit of judo or aikido here and there. But I could just imagine if it were me and I took, maybe I got my blue belt in jujitsu and then booked my first MMA fight, I'd be going in wanting to do jujitsu. I could get
Right.
this guy to the ground. I'm going to choke him out. That's what I'm going to do. Forget the fact that he's a black belt and has never striked a day in his life. But, I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, if you put all that, I think it's like if somebody is a natural competitor and likes the idea of competing in a sport, it's hard to train so much for something that you don't get to showcase or you don't get to do as a sport. So it would almost be like if I hadn't done any kickboxing or boxing matches, it's like now's the time I get to show off. It's the only opportunity to do this. And like I said, it's like I do, as you see, I do grappling tournaments all the time. It's very difficult to go. This is something that I didn't understand, and you understand it, I'm sure, but it's still like going through it. You're like, oh my God, it's a lot of work to take an MMA fight. Not the work you put in, but like months of preparing. And you could imagine if you knew that in 14 weeks time, you were going to have an MMA fight with someone, how often would you think about that?
Every minute, every second.
Every minute, man.
Yeah,
every
breath,
car ride,
every sip, everything I ate, everything.
it's so consuming. And then on top of that, you got to go, you get your medicals done. You got all the people there. It's the only, you only get so many opportunities to do it. I mean, when I do a jujitsu tournament, I have multiple matches in the same day. I don't really need to think about it until maybe your first few tournaments. You think about the month leading up, whatever, but eventually you don't even really think about it till it's time. But MMA, it's so consuming. You've thought about so much. And there's a moment where every time I've had a fight, I've had 3 MMA fights. The second it's over, there's a weight that has left me that I realized I was carrying that built up and up throughout the entirety of the fight camp. You know, it's like for the first time in weeks and weeks and weeks, this weight gets lifted off your shoulders, and you truly know what it's like to like let go of something heavy, or to like you aren't even aware that you're holding on to it until it leaves you. It's very bizarre. And I've felt it 3 times now. And that's why I said, you know, my last 2 fights were at heavyweight, because like I said, it's a lot to go through. Well, my second fight, I made weight. I show up at the weigh-ins, and the guy no-showed me at the weigh-ins. So, I mean, every fighter has all these stories of people no-showing them. You know, every fight I've had opponents switch on me. It's always something. It's always something. And that's a very frustrating side of it. I'm not good at I hardly do enough stuff to keep my car legally on the road, let alone like the stupid shit you got to do to go into an MMA fight.
Yeah.
So that side of it, I'm actually shocked that a lot of fighters go through with it. As a matter of fact, I really believe that there are and you know, you have a martial arts background, you could probably attest to this. There are so many people that are qualified to at least be really good at MMA who just never take the time to go through competing and doing all that.
Well, yeah, even like for myself, like I'm way too old for it now, but I theorize about it all the time. Like UFC 1 came out when I was like 13, and I was still like doing like point fighting karate at that point in time. Like I was doing that until I was like 17, 18, 19. But MMA wasn't nearly as big back then as it is now, right? And so it wasn't ever like, hey, you could have a career in this. It was you go through a martial arts career becoming a teacher of some sort, but that never really interested me. And there was no real career for fighting. I knew Gary Goodrich personally at the time because he was also from Barrie. And he had gone through the whole thing with UFC and Pride and K1 and everything. And I watched that. And it's not like he was struggling. I mean, he was making decent money, but he wasn't like, you know, becoming rich and famous. And it was still a job, you know what I mean? And just imagine or I should actually correct that and say he was still working a job on top of doing all of that. And that was the part of it that I could never wrap my mind around. I think your job is like you do landscaping, I believe, but you also do personal training, which at least is in the same ballpark as doing martial arts. But right. You know, even if you're not doing that, you're just doing something like landscaping, like having to keep that up on top of all the other stuff you have to do to be ready. And man, like if you've never been in a fight before, you don't understand how much is all up here, right? Like you have no real concept of how much of that is all up here. Everything that we're doing here is like mechanical. It's almost maintenance, but the real battle's going up on here. So if you have to couple, you know, your training, work, personal lives, girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever it is, your dog, you know, everything in your life on top of, hey, then I've got to fucking cut weight, and then I've got to go step into a cage with another man who wants to kill me. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of stuff going on. So it's, you know, the physical thing, and all fighters say this, I'm sure you can attest to it too. Physical thing is a big part of it, but it's still not the biggest part of it.
No, exactly. And it's really, if you're not willing to dedicate yourself fully to it, because I kind of had the attitude of like, hey, I just want to do this. I just want to see this through. I'd love to do it. But then, yeah, that's fine and good, but it's hard to commit to that notion and not be so self-analytical. And every single thing you do that could potentially make for a slightly worse fight camp, staying up late one night, you know, dating, prioritizing anything over this, you can't help but second guess. And you can't help but sort of have this, at least for me, I don't want to say like regret or worry or fear, but it's like, if you're not putting your all and doing everything you possibly can for this fight, and you are making exceptions and you are to letting things take priority over your camp for this 3/4 of the damned year that I mean, I'm sorry, a quarter of a year. It's a quarter of a year, essentially. Sometimes yeah, it's a lot of fight camps are a quarter of a year that you're going to have this fight. So when you're trying to build a business, when you're trying to do other things for work, man, it's really hard not to then be like, well, shit, I'm not training as much as I should, or should I be doing this? Anytime you take off for anything, it could be a family thing. Your dad could need help with his car, but if you miss training for that, you really feel it. That was tough for me. It was hard. Like if I got a little injured or something happened, and part of me was like, maybe I should take a day off, or maybe I was going to go out on a date or something. Man, if not, you just feel that shame, you feel that worry, and then you feel like your teammates are judging you for it. Yeah, the psychological side is really something else.
Yeah.
Oh,
But I mean, it's got to be pretty rewarding. Like I'm thinking of, and I know enough about jujitsu to know how impressive this is. That you did a competition and you caught, and I think this is something you've gotten pretty good at. Maybe since then, possible, obviously before that, but definitely since then, is catching the guy in half guard and putting him to sleep with an arm triangle. Or I think you have a different name for that choke. But people who aren't necessarily in MMA may want to tune out for like 2 or 3 minutes here. But I'm curious about that particular choke and how you felt watching it go viral, because it kind of did. Right?
yeah. So what happened was I had been hitting arm triangles since the beginning. It was like the first thing I did as a white belt. And you perhaps know enough about arm triangles to know that some people say that in mount, it's hard to actually choke somebody with it because you don't have the angle. So that was a position that I had great success with, and was like my second or third tournament. I think my second tournament, I had been told, hey, you're not really choking people in mount with it. Well, I put a guy to sleep my second tournament ever as a white belt in mount. So I was like, well, clearly it's a choke. Clearly I can do it as a choke. And then I just kind of built from there. And by the time I was a blue belt, I mean, more than half of my matches at that point had ended in arm triangle. And I started developing a feel for what you would know as a Von Flue choke. Jason Von Flue, who was on The Ultimate Fighter, the UFC, Strikeforce, he was notorious for choking people with his shoulder. So it's just shoulder pressure, typically below the throat, somewhere at like the top of the lungs, the windpipe. It's essentially like cinching off the top of a balloon. If you're on the windpipe, is a good way to think of it. And I've just kind of always gravitated towards chokes, but I developed this style of doing it where you put the shoulder in a position where it can choke them. And then as they go to get out of that and give you an arm, maybe you blood choke them. But it's really just a pin. I prioritize it like this, and this will make sense, is that first and foremost, you're pinning them. So you're not getting swept, you're not getting reversed, you're not giving up position. That's the first priority. The second priority is to make sure that they are exhausting more than you are, which is like a great rule of a fight anyway. If there's no points and there's no anything else, it really comes down to whose energy and whose health bar is going down faster, no matter the position. Even if you're on bottom, if you're winning the energy battle, in my mind, you're winning, because strikes drain you, good moves drain you. And if it's not, that's a sign of who's winning the jiu-jitsu battle, is who's dominating the energy battle, for the most part. But so that would mean you're not allowed to squeeze for this choke. If it means going into a sort of a lactic threshold or an anaerobic threshold, you're not allowed to squeeze. You're not allowed to, that's a time bomb. Squeezing a submission, in my mind, is a time bomb. And maybe you could do it in waves, but you're not actually building up to exhaustion. You're staying within an easy thing. So I'd have this shoulder position. I can hold it for 5, 10, 20 minutes, as long as I want, this choking position. And then you get good at not giving up any part of the choke, and you get good at eliminating more space, getting closer to the choke. So it can be a slow cooker. Obviously, as you get better, you don't need as much time typically. So that kind of gives you an idea of what I do that's a bit different. By purple belt, I started it was half guard is what I really started hitting it with. Like more than half my wins at purple belt have been top half arm triangles. And I've put a couple people to sleep in top half guard. Now, this is what went viral. This is crazy, dude. Every once in a while, life gives you a magic moment. This is cool because not many people actually know how magical this was. And I want to start off by saying, I like the guy, Josh, who it happened to. Very good guy. He's a good black belt. He has a lot of fun with jiu-jitsu. He has a great ego about stuff. So I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression, but I got to explain where I was coming from. Okay. So at that point in time, it was my second time competing in a division with black belts. I had one match with the black belt before, and I lost on points. So this is my first ever win against a black belt. Talk about magical moments. Okay. He is the coach at the time at a gym where my ex-girlfriend went to when we broke up. Okay. So I don't know if they know anything, but you know how your head works. And in your mind, you're thinking, and I had already made a promise to my teammates. I'm like, if I ever go against anybody at that school, you know how you get, dude. Like, I'm like, you know, a different guy, but she started seeing a guy potentially overlapped towards the end of our thing, or it was a very smooth handoff at the very least, you know, no offense. It is what it is. It happens all the time. It's not the worst offense, but it was enough to really, and it gets even thicker because there was a guy at that gym that I had trained with that it was like the only person I had ever had like a real issue with in training. We didn't see eye to eye. I felt disrespected. He had kind of called me a hobbyist, and he was a pro fighter and disrespected my training. And so I had even said before my girlfriend went to that gym, I had been saying, if I ever get my hands on somebody from that school, boy, do I have a lot to prove. This was like 2 years in the fucking making. Okay. This went all the way back to when I had just got my blue belt. You don't care what we say, right? Fuck, whatever. It's no big deal, right? So I'm going against this guy who's a black belt coach from this gym. And he has like kind of a showboaty style. I had seen that he had funny entrances on Fight to Win. Fight to Win's like a big pro grappling series thing. A lot of the bigger grapplers do it. The Gordon Ryans, the Nicky Rods, whatever. So he was on a couple Fight to Wins, and I had seen him on it. And I saw that he comes out and he kind of does a dance, and he's got a funny personality, but he starts showboating and he waves to my camera. So I'm in his full guard. He waves to my camera. He then kind of like sits up because I'm prying my elbow in his inner thigh. So instead of just opening his guard with it, he doesn't like that I'm prying my elbow in his inner thigh. And he kind of sits up into a sweeping position, a Kimura position, just to kind of get a reaction, right? Because I'm in his guard. So initially people see it and they're like, well, why is that all he did? And it's like, because I'm in his guard, he can do whatever he wants. I can't submit him there, right? So he sits up and I just launched on him, and the stars aligned and life handed me a moment that, I mean, I couldn't imagine anything ever comparing to this moment as far as the layers of magic to it, the lead up, the me saying, wait till I get my hands on. I wasn't even going to be able to go against this guy, but people backed out of our division and I got to do it. And I said before this, I'm like, all I hope is that I get to go against Josh Weinstock. That's all I was saying the whole day, right? Like before that, and there was no chance. And then people backed out. And sure enough, we're going against each other. He's waving to my camera, his arms up, he's turned up, he's looking at me, and I launched on him and I buried my shoulder on him, and even more stars aligned. because he did a light little tap before going unconscious, but the ref didn't see it. And I kept choking, and his fingers curled up, his legs opened. And it was one of the most, I mean, as far as being choked unconscious, it's visually one of the most, I would say, entertaining chokeouts. Out of all my chokeouts, this one looks the coolest as far as the, his legs that plop open. And like I said, his fingers curl, and it's crazy because you see the light tap, and dude, that went so viral. I mean, it was every big Jiu-Jitsu Times did a write-up on it. All this crazy stuff happened. Podcasts in the jiu-jitsu scene were talking about it. I'm watching like Henzo Gracie's commenting all these, like, I mean, laughing, crying, the Eric Paulson. It was just, that was a moment of all moments. And it's not like it was anything that special. Like something like that could happen in the gym. It could happen wherever, but it just so happened that it was on camera moments after he waved. Like that adds to the karma. It was just, I rode that high I'm still riding that high, dude. Like,
fair enough. I heard about it from a couple of my friends here in Toronto who do jiu-jitsu. One messaged me being like, "Oh, I noticed you're friends with this dude on Instagram. How do you know him?" I'm like, "Oh, we talked shit together back in the day." And he was like, "Man, if you ever get to talk to him, tell him, like, sick joke." I'm like, "No problem." And then I have another friend who's also, he's a jiu-jitsu teacher here in Toronto, and I was showing him the video of it. He's like, "Give me your phone," because he needed to watch it over, because at first he couldn't comprehend what you were doing, because like the way he was seeing it, the triangle itself wasn't locked up in the blood choke, right? Like you had him, like you were talking earlier, you had his windpipe, you were crushing him. And I don't think he even realized it, because I think he was probably looking for the pressure here, that he was like almost ignoring the pressure here. And my friend who watched it said the same thing. He's like, honestly, like I've been in that position with people, like bigger guys. I'm not going to allow myself to get in that position anymore, because he saw what you did. And he was just like, man, like once people start figuring that out, it's no different than like, say what, John Danaher and guys like that have developed the leg game in jiu-jitsu. In a way, I think from what I was hearing from people I know that do jiu-jitsu, you kind of opened their eyes to something new too, like a new possibility. That's probably a lot of why it went viral, aside from the fact that it looked beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of it helped that he waved to the camera, because that was like a cool element of it. I mean, like the title in Jiu-Jitsu Times thing was, can somebody be choked in their full guard? The age old saying. Now, since then, it's happened, and before me, there are videos of people doing like Ezekiel chokes. I've never seen another video of somebody choking somebody in their full guard with an arm triangle, except I have another one. Yeah. But I didn't choke a guy unconscious, and it wasn't nearly as cool. But I have hit that choke one other time. Here's the thing about jiu-jitsu. It's a very new sport. So, and it just happens to be one of those sports where it's an infinite amount of curriculum and directions that it could go, and submission holds. And there are a lot of things that are ignored. So I come from a catch wrestling background. As far as when I was learning jiu-jitsu, we offered a catch wrestling class. Now, I'm not sure if you're too familiar with catch wrestling, but I mean, a lot of people argue that it's the origins of submission wrestling, and even a lot of judo is influenced by it. But the late 1800s in Europe, it led to pro wrestling. So pro wrestling moves are based off of old catches, catch, can. Catches, catch, can, meaning catch me if you can. It sounds cooler when you know that that's what it means. Yeah. And I mean, it was cool because there's a lot of tie-ins. I come from the weightlifting, powerlifting background. There's a lot of tie-ins to old time strongman and old school wrestlers. Back in the day, there was a lot of overlap. A lot of your legends in old school strongman and weightlifting, especially before like popular Olympic style weightlifting, when they were just doing sorts of weird feats of strength, they also happened to typically be competitive grapplers. typically in just general folk style wrestling. But catch wrestling, and you'll know this choke. Josh Barnett hit it on Dean Lister. Do you know what a compression choke looks like a scarfold choke or a Kessa? They might call it a Kessa crush in judo. It's a judo pin choke. It's a catch wrestling pin choke from scarfold, and some people just call it a fat boy choke. Now that's another one I've hit a lot, and I've had success with it even against black belts. But that's a choke that the average jiu-jitsu person in the average room, they've never felt it. Like when I go to other gyms rolling and I go for it, they're like, what did you just do? Like, was I supposed to tap to that? And it's like, yeah. It's like, were you able to breathe? And they're like, no, but why did I have to tap? Like, this is the problem with jiu-jitsu. You have so many moves to learn. Coaches typically teach moves. See, you the way you explain choking when you were like here and not here, you were pointing at your carotid arteries. And then some people might know windpipe, but that's the extent of it. In jiu-jitsu, if you even know choking concepts, you typically only know that you can cut off both carotids or crush their windpipe. That's the extent of it. Most people don't even understand pinning concepts. See, when you watch jiu-jitsu, you rarely see people using weight displacement and strong pins. They typically go for like non-forward moves. There's like, I wouldn't want to say it's like old school, and I always say like, sometimes in judo, people always say, or Aikido is really rooted in, you use somebody's energy against them. And wrestling, it's like using your energy against somebody. Jiu-jitsu is almost like neither. It's this like balanced in between. You can go 360 degrees of direction. You're rarely moving in one direction. And there are tons of pressure people, especially back like up until like the early 2000s, you saw a lot of pressure styles of jiu-jitsu. And you do at the highest level, people know how to put their weight. But in the average room, people don't even realize how to fully displace their weight. It's a big Team Lloyd Irvin, who's a hot topic in and of itself, but he coined a concept called third point pressure. And this will make sense even to people who don't know jiu-jitsu. You put 2 points on the mat and your third point is on your opponent. And you use the angles of the structure of your body to displace as much of your weight on your opponent. And then you could then spread it out, say from like for my arm triangle choke, it's not as much of a direct pressure at first. I displace it from top left shoulder to bottom right hip. So that's a John Danaher concept. Double trouble. You pin the left side, the right side, the top, and the bottom. So that's something you can do in half guard that's not very utilized. But the idea of trapping somebody in all four corners like that, so you can then spread your weight using this third point pressure, from as much of a connection as possible, or you can center it into one area, which is what happens when I throw it into my shoulder to then finish the choke. And I use the length of my body. I get on my tippy toes. I angle in. I'm also aware of coming straight down, not pushing past them. So I lift their far shoulder up. So because it's impossible, if my feet are way behind me and my hips are behind my shoulder, how can I possibly sink straight down? So what I do is I prop their shoulder up so they're not flat to the ground. There's an angle that I can drive into. So I don't have to just sink straight down. I can actually press into them. That's the art of that shoulder choke, is you actually lift them up so you can drive through their chest and it's not having to just sink straight down. You can actually pressure into it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's really the art to that choke, but nobody thinks like that yet. It's a new sport. They have so many other things to think about. They have to learn their moves and they don't ask why. And the coaches don't often explain the why. It's a sport that is much less conceptual and principle based and much more move based. Now things are changing, But that's been a lot of jujitsu, is just learning the moves, not asking the whys. That's why there's so many names to so many positions. See, in catch wrestling, they don't even care. You know, a Kimura and an Americana are the same thing. It's a double wrist lock. You move it up, you move it down, whatever the hell. It's a double wrist lock. They don't have a million names for it. They probably wouldn't even want to go so far as to distinguish between an omoplata and a Kimura or what. It's just, you understand the idea. You know, you have neck cranks, you have chokes, you have, you get the point, but jujitsu is not like that. And because of that, that's why everybody has to learn the names of so many guards, because there's a guard name for every specific series of grips. But you know, there's a lot of high level jujitsu guys that I say high level, good jujitsu guys, kings of their gyms, or at least, you know, good enough to be good against some black belts, good brown belts. They don't even like have the fundamental understanding of what makes a pant grip so good, or a foot on the hip so good. They just know that when they're playing, you know, spider guard, that this is exactly where the hands go and this is exactly where the feet go. And they're just sheep.
Very formational. It's like, it's kind of the opposite of what Bruce Lee taught, right? Where like
The opposite.
they're kind of locked in form, like they're sitting in their karate stance and they're forgetting how to actually throw the kick. And on the topic of names, I'm hoping one day, just like there's, you know, the Gable grip, Darce choke, the Von Flue choke, I'm hoping that one day that technique is called the Turpin.
Oh, the Turpin. Oh, I have never heard that, and I am going to start saying that. Just like
Please
pinning
do.
people as or a style of pinning. Yeah. I really like that, man. People call, like, it gets the slang around the area. Some people call it Terp chokes, but it's ironic because the first thing that people started calling a Terp choke was my style of loop choke in the gi, because I was hitting a weird loop choke and a weird cross choke with my fist instead of instead of using their collars to choke them on each side. I was like punching. If you're looking at a video, you can see I would take my fist and punch the carotid and pull the lapel across the other side. And I was putting a lot of people out in gyms with it. And that became the Terp choke before my arm triangle did. Now it's the arm triangle. Anytime I do an arm triangle in a guard, people will call it the Terp choke, but I like the Terp pin. I mean, that's my full that is something, will be a Terp pin.
It just makes sense, right?
At least a cult knowing. I don't know if anything will ever transcend to like the level of, but you never know, man. It would be cool to have something named after me.
Oh,
that would be wild.
For sure.
That would blow my mind. But
arm triangle chokes are super effective. Like, I worked security for a long time, and like an unruly drunk in an arm triangle, money. You know, like they don't know what's going on. They can't really move. You have control over whether you put them out or not. You know, like but you've got them immobilized, and like they can't really hit you. You know what I mean? So
right.
So it's such an effective self-defense technique that you know, I think it should be taught in schools, to be honest. Like, imagine if every woman knew how to do triangle chokes from the bottom, for like leg triangle chokes and arm triangle chokes. I'm pretty sure sexual assault would drop in a hurry.
Yeah. Everybody should know, everyone should know probably choking principles and have some sort of idea of chokes that you should do or be able to do. What I love most about chokes, and this is what led me to getting so damned good at chokes and nothing else when it comes to submissions. I have been playing with leg locks lately, and I understand the other stuff. I occasionally hit some weird Kimura or armbar dude, but I might go months without hitting one. And what it is, and this will make sense, I'm a big, strong guy. How hard can I honestly go for Kimuras? If the only thing preventing me from shredding your shoulder is your grip, I can't put my all into that. I can't do everything I possibly can to you know, torque your shoulder. I can't do everything I possibly can to get you to tap for a reverse heel hook. Are you kidding me? What's going to happen? I mean, before long, I'm going to be known as the guy breaking people's shit.
Yeah.
So
From a training standpoint, for sure. I mean, it'll be different if you were in fights and going through one of those techniques. Like, obviously, you're not
right.
going to think the same way about it. You're like, yeah, I'm going to rip this guy's fucking arm off, no problem.
Yeah.
But if it's one of your training partners, you don't want that. So, and like men are men, they don't want to tap to shit. Like you're going to have to hurt them before they tap you. You don't want to hurt them. So, when it comes to training those techniques, unless you have, someone that you can trust well enough to put them in those vulnerable positions and have them understand they're in a vulnerable position, be willing to eat the humble pie and tap out. It's dangerous. It's a dangerous game. So I understand that.
Yeah, choking is safe. It's kind of fun. You give them like this little, they wake up crisp and they're like, whoa, what just happened? And it's kind of funny when things go too far with chokes, when things go too far with arm bars, I thank God I've never really popped anybody's, shit in a submission hold, but that's another thing. That's a karma that I don't want on my plate. Even in a competition, I compete a lot. If I went at Kimuras and arm bars and heel hooks the way I go at chokes, just like any heel hook specialist, you talk to somebody who's a heel hook specialist, ask them how many knees and ankles they've blown.
Yeah.
I bet you a lot of them would have to use two hands.
I would imagine, for sure. I mean,
there's a chance some of them have injured 30, 40 people to some degree.
Well, the joints can pop so easy sometimes, and sometimes not. Like, sometimes it's damn near impossible. It's such a crapshoot in that way. But yeah, for sure. If you practice something like heel hooks or, arm bars, all that, of course you're gonna hurt people unintentionally, even.
Yeah, one of my main training partners, he had a fight where he got a guy in a heel hook. He wouldn't tap. He blew his knee. He got him in a Kimura, and the guy wouldn't tap, and he blew his shoulder, all in the same match. I've never had to do that ever, and he had to do that in the same fight.
Joking kind of saves us from ourselves then.
Yeah, and it's so ironic because in reality,
that's where you die.
Yeah. Whoa. So the safest move to go for is actually the only one that is guaranteed to win in a fight. I'm essentially killing people every time they tap. Yeah. And when you tap me to a heel hook, I mean, yeah, there's a good chance you're going to do well in that fight after that heel hook, but the fight's not over. I mean, you've seen Monty Python.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I can even speak to this. Like, I had done striking martial arts my whole life. Like, there were very few people my own age when UFC 1 came out that I wouldn't beat in a fist fight. You know what I mean? So
right.
But I would get in fights where I could beat up older people in a fist fight. But they'd get a hold of me, and that's a whole different game. So I remember the first UFC. I watched it with some friends, and we're like, you remember how they went? It's like, jiu-jitsu versus boxing versus kickboxing, and like it was set up that way, and they had those really neat intros to, like, introduce the fighter and their skill and their style. And I just remember all my friends, every time they would show Horace Gracie, being like, oh, that dude's getting his ass kicked. And I'm like, I don't know, like I had already done some Japanese jiu-jitsu and learned that was a game changer from, like, say, Taekwondo or karate, right? Like, that's a big deal. You've got all these wrist locks, you've got all these throws, you've got chokes, you've got these elements to it, even in the, like, Japanese and Russian version of jiu-jitsu. And then all of a sudden I hear this, I started hearing about Brazilian jiu-jitsu before I ever saw Horace Gracie. So I already had, like, a little bit of front loading. So when I heard it, and I actually didn't know the name Gracie as being a founder, because I actually, like, used to train under the founder of Kempo Karate, so I understood, like, names and how that trained. And so I knew the Gracie name. And so I'm watching this, and I was, like, betting my friends, being like, no, man, that skinny little dude's gonna fuck that dude up. You watch, right? And obviously I was able to run that through. What was it, like the first 3 or 4 UFCs? That guy continued to win, right? And so. Yeah, like you don't really, it was a game changer for martial artists to actually see what grappling could do. I mean, I had wrestled in high school, and I had that humbling experience of getting up against a guy who was maybe half my size, who could just own me on the mats. You know what I mean? It didn't matter. Like, I was way stronger than him. Like, I could pick him up and throw him if I wanted to, but you can't do that in wrestling. So he could just manhandle me just because he knew the technique better than I did. And that was when my eyes first started open to, oh, and then UFC starts happening, and that just becomes accentuated. And I was a student of like Bruce Lee's school of thought when it came to martial arts in terms of using things that were functional. So, the UFC changed my life in that way, and in terms of how I thought about fighting, how I thought about defending myself, even how I thought about training martial arts and everything else. And so getting to watch the development of this sport, which has happened in my lifetime, thankfully, seeing where it is now, where it's now like the fourth major sport, it's fucking beautiful to see. And again, going back, like I didn't do it, and I'm not going to start now. I mean, Glover Teixeira just won the light heavyweight champion. He's a year older than me, so it's not complete crazy talk, but at the same time, I have so much respect for the guys who have gone out and done it, because it's almost like they're living a fantasy life that I wish I could have. So it's been a lot of fun watching your journey, because again, going back to when we met, you weren't training yet, and seeing how far you've come in that time, it's been a lot of fun to watch. So thank you for doing what you did, and allowing me to watch.
Oh, dude, I really appreciate that. It's something to think about with jujitsu that's always good to know, is that there are age groups. So as far as competitions go, I mean, it may not be being able to be, feeling like you're the Hoist Gracie or something, but it is really cool. And there are masters divisions all the way up to like 50 plus. Just today, I trained with a guy before I hopped on this, who's 67 years old, and he's an exception to the rule. He is a two-time world champ at brown and black belt. He was a college wrestler, Golden Gloves boxer. He was one of my dad's best friends growing up. And when I started doing jiu-jitsu, eventually, he actually brought him to a competition I was in. And then we started training together some after that. Now I train with him every week. But that guy at 67 is still, I mean, he's damn near impossible to sweep, and he could definitely still beat a lot of. I guess here's a good way to put it: he could beat a lot of UFC guys in a grappling match.
Wow.
I mean, it would be very hard for him to endure the strikes and deal with the speed and explosiveness of the average high level athlete. But he definitely has people that he would be able to sweep, get on top of, be impossible to sweep, and eventually submit or just hold down. So he's an exception to the rule. Not many people out there like him, but it's weird. Jiu-jitsu, especially if you learn, it depends on the person, man, because everyone's body's different. And some people's body just, you can tell it's going to be an uphill battle. Like trying to imagine my dad trying to do jujitsu, his joints are just in a different state where he doesn't have the muscle memory. He didn't grow up doing stuff. But that aside, a question I had when I was hearing that is, what was it like? Because I mean, at least you were doing a martial art that's extremely, I mean, it definitely helps in a lot of ways. It could even help more than just having a jujitsu background, especially if you don't know how to really wrestle like some jujitsu people. Having a karate background, especially a competitive karate background or any type of striking, I think you've done more than just karate, right? Like you're pretty versed in strikes and stuff like that. How was it hard for you? I know you said you had experienced a little bit of grappling before that, or kind of knew some stuff, that there was another side of things, but how hard was it for your ego to come to terms with kind of like, whoa, this is what's best potentially? Or
Yeah.
especially UFC, this is the thing, it's kind of come back full circle, because once strikers learn takedown defense, it wasn't just that jiu-jitsu was king, but for a little while there, if you knew jiu-jitsu, you were like seen as infinitely better. It was a little foolish almost. It was almost it's come back a little bit from that. As a matter of fact, now, especially with the modern rule set, you'd probably be better off being a striker that spends a couple years learning how to avoid takedowns, some submission defense, some get up drills. But what was that like?
Oh, it was brutal. Like, to be honest, my first experience came secondhand because going back to Gary, I knew I knew very well. Like we went to the same school. Like I trained with him. I knew what his striking ability was. To see him get beat by a grappler,
Oh
was like,
yeah.
oh shit. Like I can even remember his first fight, which he did win. Even when the guy took him down, I was like, oh wait, what just happened? Right? And Gary's so fucking massive and strong that he got out of that position. He ended up getting the dominant position, and then there was those 8
Boom.
elbow strikes from hell. But eventually he lost to grapplers, and that was when I was like, wait a second, like he is so strong. I had a lot more interaction with one of his cousins who was the Canadian arm wrestling champion on his left and right arm. Him and my stepdad were friends, so he was over all the time. I used to arm wrestle this dude all the time. I knew how strong he was. He could pick me up with one hand, go like that with me, no problem. And Gary was clearly stronger. And then I see him in a position where it did not matter how strong that gorilla of a man was. This guy still controlled him. And
Yeah.
that's when I had to go, oh shit, there's something else here. And I remember feeling that a little bit, obviously, like the explanation about wrestling, even a little bit in judo, because you could get some like people who were just really good with their technique, who could catch you off balance, and it didn't matter that you could overpower or even power your way out of position. They had their technique down so fast and so accurately that you had no time to try and power your way out of the position. And so I think a lot of it was just realizing that, there was a level to grappling where strength stopped mattering and technique was king, right?
Yeah.
And then obviously, like, Hoist had already kind of opened my mind in that way. And then, taking a jujitsu class, getting in that position where there's a dude like I had literally had a schoolyard fight with, beat up for like hours. I'm exaggerating, but like, I beat his ass in a schoolyard fight. We eventually became friends. He wanted to learn striking. I was interested in the grappling he was doing, which ended up being BJJ. And so we kind of exchanged. I brought him to one of my classes. He brought me to one of his classes. And to be honest, I mean, like someone coming in striking as like entry level, everyone's kind of equal. Like you're all kind of new, you know what I mean? But like when you get into jujitsu, like you don't have that luxury. Like you are immediately up against someone who knows how to kill you and you don't know how to defend yourself. Right? Like that's the only way you can kind of learn that. With striking, you can learn with a bunch of like you can put a whole class of white belts together and not include a higher belt in there at all, and everybody's fine. Like everyone will progress to the same level. I've noticed with jiu-jitsu, you kind of can't do that. The way people progress in jiu-jitsu is by training with not only people at their own belt level, but with people above them, right? Aside from being taught by people above them, but actually training, like you were talking, like getting in there with a guy who was a blue belt when you were a white belt, that's a learning experience. You don't really get that through striking belt systems, right? Like you just don't. It's not the same
Right.
thing. Because a white belt striker can have an advantage over a purple belt striker simply in like speed, accuracy, right? And so that kind of takes it away. But with jujitsu, that gap gets narrowed where it's like technique, because it's so important, overshines, you know, quickness or agility or even flexibility or any of that stuff. Insofar, I mean, there's you can think of, especially a lot of the Gracies that still practice today. It's like their fundamental jujitsu is so good that even though they're maybe not as physically strong as their opponents or as quick as their opponents, they're still winning because they've got those foundations down where it's just muscle memory. They don't have to think about it, where the other guy, maybe does, despite the fact. So I think that was the biggest thing. And yeah, like to be in a position where it was like on my feet, I felt confident with people who were like way bigger than me, older than me, any of that. And then I'm getting tapped out by some kid who's like 4 or 5 years younger than me, definitely smaller than me, but has one belt level above where I'm at, which would never happen in striking. You know what I mean? Like there's
Right.
no way, even when I was a brown belt, there's no way a black belt was just owning me, right? Like it just wouldn't happen like that. But in jujitsu, that can happen. So yeah, it was an eye opener. And the other thing, like even before that, I think what really made me curious about it, aside from, you know, watching the UFC and whatnot, was getting in a fight against a guy who you know, he was a fat dude. He was strong, but he wasn't all that fit. He was just a lot bigger than me and could get on top of me and I couldn't get up. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Whereas if I had jujitsu skills, I would have known how to move my hips out from underneath him and push him off. I didn't have any of those skills yet. So he was able to just lay on top of me until the fight was over. You know what I mean? Until like I was so exhausted from trying to physically manhandle him off of me, which I was never going to do, that the fight was over and he could have had his way with me. He didn't, thankfully, but he could have. So yeah, it's I think the other difference is there's, you know, not to say that you can't die from being punched in the face, but it doesn't feel the same as being choked out. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
getting hit hard, you see stars, maybe you black out, maybe you do get knocked out. It sucks, it hurts, but it's not quite the same as that helpless feeling of being choked out.
Right. Right. Yeah,
So
which is ironic because it's scary as hell to get hit. But it's not the same repercussion as the choke. Yeah, it's really weird how that all works, and the technical side of jujitsu making it so hard for anybody who, especially once you're legitimately good, comparatively to striking. You know, you see some high level athletes where they have a natural hand-eye coordination. They have also, I mean, you have a guy like Ben Askren who's trained striking for a long time. He's a good mixed martial artist, but you know, that guy's at least realistically never going to be a great puncher, right? Jake Shields, you see guys where it's like, wow, this is just something that honestly, if you had to put your money on, you train a guy for 6 weeks to go out there and box Ben Askren. If they are an athlete, they really might put it on him. There are some guys walking the street who there are people who've maybe never, this is crazy, but maybe I'm wrong, but there are probably people out there who've never been in a fist fight who, when it's time to go, might knock out and beat Ben Askren.
yeah,
And not only
I was going to bring up that concept earlier on something else we were talking about, but sometimes an untrained fighter almost has an advantage, right? Like I can remember getting in this fight with this guy who had, you know, I found out after the fact it was the first time he'd ever thrown a punch at anyone, right? And I'm like, well skilled at dodging punches. For whatever reason, maybe it was because he had never thrown a punch at anybody before. I didn't know he was going to punch me. I had no idea. Once I did figure, once my brain registered, hey, he's going to hit me, I didn't know where it was coming from. And I like literally had no idea what to do with it. And he fucking cracked me and I saw stars. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's literally the first time he's ever punched anyone. And I've had grown men trying to take my head off since I was 4. You know, so it was, but he was successful in that term because, and this is the thing, maybe I think with jujitsu, there's going to be some level of natural ability there, but it's not as deterministic as natural ability when it comes to striking, right? If you look at like an Israel Asanya and you look at like Damian Maia, I mean, in theory, you could think that Damian Maia may have put in more hours hitting pads than Israel, right? Like it's right. Actually possible just based on their age and their level of experience. That's actually possible. But you see, Israel has this natural ability like that Damian just doesn't have, whether it's like fast twitch muscles, whether it's reaction time, combination of all of that. There's just something there that like one guy can have and the other guys don't. That's not as true in jiu-jitsu and grappling, it seems. It seems like people, it's more about the knowledge and the technique and the actual practice of it than, let's just say, a natural God-given ability. Like someone like a Conor McGregor has to drop a left hand and knock the guy out. You know what I mean? Not everybody has that ability. And especially like we hear it all the time with punching power, that's not really something you can teach the fundamentals of how to throw a punch, but some people just have that natural ability to throw one better than everybody else.
100%. And there is something very primal about fighting for your life, and that's what it feels like the first time you're training a lot of times. And there's something really bizarre about punching and fighting in that sense, where it's not, it is technical, but everybody gets the idea. Like a dog gets the idea of fighting the first time they ever fight. And there is a bizarre, whether it goes down to some sort of epigenetics, some sort of thing in our subconscious, who knows what it really is, but we know how to do a lot of things that we don't know how to do. And jujitsu may not be one of those things, but there is something that some people tap into instinctually and intuitively, something where it almost is that phenomenon. Perhaps some things you've heard described as this. There are certain arts they say you actually get worse at before you get better at. You know, it's hard to think of, maybe dancing, maybe whatever it is. Sometimes once you start learning the idea and realizing certain things, you no longer can have that natural ability, that wild card of instinctually doing things right. And now you're just doing things at a really bad level, that sophomore slump, so to speak. You go from beginner's luck, which is just riding that primal wave that may or may not go well. It's never going to be elite, but it might go pretty well comparatively to what you would do once you know a little bit, but you still, that information and your ability to understand it and the wisdom, it's just not there. So you're drawing from a weaker source. You're drawing from what you consciously know versus that subconscious wild card. I mean, my dog, he's never been in a fight with another dog, but I could tell, not just by the way he plays, but I mean, I could see it in him. When he goes, he knows he knows the objective, and he may not do well against a dog that's been trained to fight, but it wouldn't look like that's something that some people have in them, man. Punching's weird like that.
Yeah. So aside from, the ability to defend yourself with your bare hands and kill someone with your bare hands, what would you say that about this whole experience has helped you grow as a man the most over these last few years?
I'll tell you, there's a couple big things. Number one, putting so much work into something. If I ever wanted to replace, say, career for jujitsu or something else for the amount of effort and time I put into jujitsu, it would be very easy for me. It's what led me to thinking that I could learn how to play guitar and go up, and every week I go to an open mic, and that's something I started like 2.5 years ago, having absolutely no natural ability in either one when it comes to guitar or singing. And I'm only going to put so much effort into it, but I never would have been able to understand the learning process and understand what the ways you can get good at something. They say that once you've gotten really good at something and taken on something intellectually, it's much easier to see the process of learning and taking on something new. So I had never really taken the time to get good at something and know something the way I have with jujitsu and really dedicate it. Now I think there's nothing. It's so empowering. There's nothing I couldn't learn or do to some extent. I mean, we got to be realistic, but at the end of the day, it gave me the mindset and ability to realize that I have the capability of doing pretty much anything I want without obvious, hurdles, the ones that will no way you could, certain things, but you get what I mean. It's made me want to take on so much, and it's given me the drive. And if I ever, like, for instance, I was doing stand-up comedy before I got into the MMA. If I get back into stand-up comedy, dude, I'm going to be a new beast because I understand the work you can put into something.
If you're going to do stand-up comedy, definitely wear the dress. That works. Just saying.
Yeah. 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 It's when you excel at something in like jujitsu, you really know what it's like to maximize your time. You're not wasting much time. I mean, there are people out there who are great at jujitsu who sit at home and play video games all day. But having the lifestyle I have, working full time, having a dog, having other hobbies, doing other things, the amount of work ethic it's garnished is just unreal. And then, dude, you could relate to this. It's there's something in you that relates to like the fighter sort of mentality. You know, it's in you. It's a part of your life, even not just as a fan, as a practitioner. It's been so cool to say that. I mean, when you're around sensitive artists all day, you become more like a sensitive artist. So I had a history being around slam poets, comics, rappers, whatever I've been into over the years. Powerlifters, that was a different thing. That brought something out of me. Being around weightlifters, that was a good side. It was a good influence as far as like having that sort of like, there were the positive alpha influences on my life, and it changed my views because coming from that sort of that punk rock, gothy, outcast sort of mind that also was around the drama kids and the poetry people and all that, you had a different view of jocks. And hanging around lifters helped some, but being around fighters, I mean, God, what a thing to draw from, what a thing to be a chameleon around. Like, it changes you to spend not just to learn the art of jujitsu, not just to be able to punch somebody in the face and do an MMA fight, it changes you to know that every day you're in the trenches with fighters, with savages that you couldn't have dreamed of ever hanging around. I didn't know anybody like that. I didn't grow up around a Gary Goodrich. I didn't know anybody who did this. I mean, if somebody was a white belt in jiu-jitsu, they were the baddest, in my mind, they were the baddest dude I knew. Like I knew some like guys who were like in a biker gang and had maybe done some rough stuff and weren't afraid to punch somebody in the face. And that was about the extent of it. I knew a guy who did an amateur boxing match one time. And I was like, oh my God, I know a boxer. Talk about paradigm shifting,
Yeah.
Now it's like, it's nothing to me. And it's so funny, dude, because you'll, this is another thing you'll definitely relate to this. It's like, it makes you understand how you think things will be good enough, but it takes something else to really find contentment and to know that you always kind of strive for more. Because before I ever did any sort of fighting, I thought it was enough just to know somebody, or if I just did one competition, or if I just did that, this satisfaction that you think you will achieve. And then the way you saw people, like when you're a white belt at the gym and you see a purple belt and you're like, oh my God, that guy's a purple belt. That guy's crazy. That guy's like a ninja. He could beat anybody up. And then when you're the purple belt, you don't feel like that person that you saw.
I remember that feeling very well, getting my first black belt. I remember getting my black belt was everything. My entire life, just personal life, like I devoted so much energy to that. And I just remember thinking, once I finally get it, like that's the day that I know I'm a man. I'm not going to fucking think about anything else. I did what I set out to do. And I remember I got it. It was a day after school. I did my thing. I got awarded my black belt, went home, told my stepdad, he didn't give a shit. I told my mom, she didn't really care. I went to sleep. I woke up. I went to school the next morning. I brought my black belt with me. And I'm like showing it to kids at school. Like, I had it all coiled up. And I'm like, look what I earned last night. Look what I earned last night. And everyone's like, okay. Right? It's like, I just devoted so much of my life to that. I've bled for that. I've sweat for that. I've broken bones for that. I've dreamt about it, all of that. And then, so I went home that night. I was kind of upset. Nobody gave a fuck. And I kind of got over it. I went to sleep. I got up, and I remember the next day at school, I'm like sitting in class, and I'm like, I don't really give a fuck either. You know what I mean? Like, it was kind of like, okay, now that I've got one, can I get another one in something else? You know what I remember that like immediate thought process to like, okay, now that I've done this, what else can I do? You know? And then you've already brought it up, but I wanted to bring this up too, because like I'm a musician, I sing, I play guitar, I'm in bands, and you didn't even mention to me that you were even interested in that stuff other than being a fan of music. And then I just remember one day going on YouTube or Instagram, sorry, and seeing you sitting down with a guitar and singing and playing, and I'm like, clearly this guy doesn't really know what he's doing yet.
Right.
But the balls he has to think that he knows what he's doing well enough to put that out there,
right,
tells me how much of a man this guy really is. So kudos for that, man. What you said about the confidence, that's one of the ways that I found you really inspirational and believe you would be to many other people, is just the confidence that you've had in yourself, the belief that you've had in yourself has shown through everything that I've seen you do in the time that I've known you. Like you said, like maybe 7, 8, somewhere between 7 and 10 years now. It's just just blasted through everything that you've done. I can even remember when you were when I first met you, you were still doing comedy, and I listened to a set you had sent me, and I was like, yeah, like he's got the balls of a comedian. I get it. And so to watch you translate that into mixed martial arts, well, jujitsu first, and then mixed martial arts, and even though how humble you are in your write-ups about your fights, and then eventually getting into music, I was like, holy shit. And then like it was not long between watching you like, okay, I think I just learned these 4 chords, and these 4 chords make up this song, and I know the lyrics to this song, so here I go.
Yeah.
And away you go. Next thing you know, you were on a stage doing it in front of people with a backing band, and I'm like, well done, man. Well done.
Yeah, it's cool. I don't know what I'm very fortunate to have had the vision to be able to see the things through that I have. And that is probably, if there's something I'm able to show to others, is that it's no big deal to suck at something. And it's also not that hard to get good enough at a lot of things, especially when you're willing to experience the humility and understand that honestly, more people have your back when you suck at something and are brand new than they do when you're just pretty good at it. It's funny. It doesn't really mean that much to other people. If they're your friend, they have your back. If not, they don't. There's exceptions to the rules. Certain people might not be supportive of, unless they really like what you're putting out. But yeah, it's not that big of a deal. And like so the jujitsu thing, like I said, it once you've had an MMA fight, what's the risk in going up there and being bad at playing guitar and singing? I have
Getting booed and getting knocked out are 2 totally different things.
Yeah, I could be 20 times worse, and I just don't really care, because I hate to pull the trump card, but it's like, I'm a fighter. I don't give a fuck. What do I? That's like, honestly, I don't think a lot of men realize how much not all comes down to it, but there is a bizarre sort of, I don't want to say alpha, because there's still like, there's alphas and betas within every sort of thing, but there's a bizarre sort of thing in empowerment that maybe not every fighter's even unlocked, because there are a lot of fighters that are self-conscious. They're very insecure, whatever. So it is definitely a specifically me thing to not worry about those insecurities and to have the confidence. But there is something that once you have done something like a martial art or fighting, you really are not up for being judged the same way. Whereas if all you had going for you is you were trying to play music, or all with there's a bizarre thing like that. I mean, obviously, if I was a rocket scientist and then went up there and went to play guitar, it would be a similar sort of thing to fall back on. But I don't know. There is something changed in me that came along with fighting that I think a lot of people falsely think they have when they're big and strong. Maybe in the 90s, having muscles was a lot like what it's like to do martial arts now.
Yeah.
There is a sort of confidence that you just, not everyone has it, but you get to have it. And it helped my confidence in anything. And I can very much remember, especially already having lost an MMA fight, getting knocked out in front of my friends, to go up there the first time in an open mic and just not can't. I already knew that I sucked. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? Like, I mean, maybe I'll forget my shit, get extra nervous and like tremble in my voice and walk off stage. But there's more to it. Like I say that as if just fighting alone earned me the ability to go up there. But I mean, I was doing drama in school, and I'd done other performance stuff. I was performing before I ever did fights. So it's easy to just say that fighting alone gave me that confidence, but I don't think the average fighter would be deathly afraid to go up there and try and sing and play guitar. So I'm probably being a bit, marginalizing the others, the other side of it. So
yeah, I would imagine more of it for you was the ability to see something that you wanted to do and go after it and achieve it, right? As opposed to like,
yeah,
that's the part of it. It's not that it's fighting per se. It's that you saw something you really wanted, you went after it, you achieved it, you became really good at it. And so when you're looking at doing something else, because you've already had this experience of doing that, you've already gone through the process of sucking up until being good at it, then the idea of sucking at something new doesn't seem as daunting, right? Like it doesn't seem like you're like, whatever, like I've been here before. I know the upside to it. I know the potential of it. So I'm okay. I'm comfortable here in the sucking at it, or the not being as good as I would like to be at it. Enough so that I'm going to persevere. I'm going to continue through this. I'm gonna maintain the discipline to get better at this. Put in my 10,000 hours, do the time, do all the things I need to do in order to actually achieve this. I was curious that one thing I've never had the opportunity to do is speak to a female fighter. Like I can understand, I can understand the psyche of fighting from the perspective of a male because I'm male. But I've always been really fascinated as to kind of what drives those same impulses in women, right? Like I wonder if it is the same. Like a lot of people have the theory that a lot of women who fight have like, call it heightened level of testosterone or just a little bit more tomboyish or whatever terminology you want to put on that. But I watch MMA. I know that that's not true. There's a lot of like there's Michelle Watersons out there, right? Like they're not all Chris Cyborg. So like even Gina Carano versus Chris Cyborg, like that's the difference, right? So I wonder what drives the Gina Carano to do that, because as a man, I understand like it's kind of hardwired into us, whether we've ever been in a fight or care about fighting or not. We're always in a position where we feel threatened by other men, right? Like we always feel like threatened in a competition kind of way. Like, would I, what would happen if, we deal with that all the time, right from the time we're young boys in the schoolyard to the time we're like, 20, 30-year-olds in a bar, even just walking down a busy street in a city, you can bump into a situation like that. And so I understand that like that's a lot of where it comes from. It's like kind of like judging yourself against other men. For women, it can't be that, right? It can't be like they're judging themselves against other women in that physical sense, because obviously like women don't really think about fighting each other the same way we would as men. So I wonder how much of it for them is probably like the predatory aspect of men, that they want to learn how to defend themselves, which drives that. But anyways, I think I just kind of went off on a tangent to say that it's always been a curiosity. And I'm wondering if you've had any insight into that, because I'm sure you train with some women too.
I think that it makes more general sense, like you said, there's a more obvious reason that every single man for the most part, walking this planet has a reason to consider their ability to fight. If you've never considered your ability to fight,
Lay off the soy.
yeah, it's an odd thing for me to imagine that. It's very odd. I mean, I can remember at a young age, like every boy at least considers it. They wonder how they would do. They wish they were good at fighting. I mean, it's just so obvious from the way you play with your action figures, getting into the wrestling. Even if you're not into it, there's a part of you that loves it. I mean, fighting video games, when you play, whatever, there's something to that. With women, there's probably, in my experiences, the ones that I've known that got into it, there's probably a wide variety of inspiration, because there's not such an obvious one overarching thing that makes them generally interested, although that's probably changing with the times, right? Like now that it's become more popular with women, it wouldn't be as shocking for a girl to want to get into it just based off of nothing other than just being a girl who wants to get into it. But originally, you have some people that come from a traditional martial arts background. It's few and far between, but their parents get them into karate, they get them into judo, and they make the transition. You have some that have issues with their father, maybe I'm not sure what, proving something to their father, or some sort of extent, and then issues maybe with abuse. That's super common. Extreme, that's common with the men. A lot of abuse there, a lot of PTSD, a lot of addiction. So people who've overcome addiction and just feel like once you feel like you have fought through something and you are a fighter in a more general sense, there's something in you that probably can relate to the mentality of the fighter. Or, I mean, not every fighter, that's the other thing, is not every person who does this sport is a fighter, so to speak, in their life as a person, spiritually. Some of them might be athletes, some of them, whatever, but there is something distinct about somebody who has a fighter mentality, whether or not they know how to throw a punch or do a takedown. And there are things that would make you that way as women. And I do think that you see a lot of them that have overcome adversity. You do see some that are clearly more on the tomboyish side, tough sports. Maybe they grew up with brothers. And if their brothers are super into fighting and the idea of fighting, maybe to prove themselves to them, maybe growing up around them, it's been a wide variety. But I would say that especially ones that fight, not just do jujitsu, because jujitsu, it's kind of like, you get into self-defense, you want to learn how to defend. You want to learn how to defend yourself. But the ones that actually go so far as to step out on the mat, compete, strike each other in the face, you got to wonder what they've been through.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And like on that tip, any women that are watching this, take some jujitsu. It's good for you. It's a really good idea to know how to do that. You can manipulate much larger people with those techniques than yourself. It's a valuable self-defense mechanism. And also on that tip, if you know any female fighters that may want to do this podcast, get them to reach out. If any of you watching are female fighters might want to answer that question for me, please reach out. Or any women who just have an opinion on that. I would love to hear it. But anyways, I was going to lead off on this podcast as a joke because I work with people who have DID, which is multiple personality disorder. It used to be multiple personality disorder all the time. So I was going to lead in with the joke, like, okay, who am I speaking to? Is this Mike Turpin or is this the psychedelic athlete?
Yeah.
So why don't you explain for people at home what the psychedelic athlete is?
All right. So, well, I essentially turned 27, having never done a drug or anything in my life. And for a handful of years, I've been very, very interested in psychedelics, particularly DMT. The first ever podcast episode I listened to was an episode where Graham Hancock was on Joe Rogan. People were talking about podcasts. I was like, oh, Joe Rogan has a popular one. I Googled best episodes of Joe Rogan. I see this thing about this guy, Graham Hancock, in there he's talking about DMT and like lost civilizations and like weird places you go when I'm like, what in the hell is this guy? Like, what? Okay, I want to listen to this. And then I'm hearing people talk about ayahuasca, and it just set me down a rabbit hole where I'm like, hold on, wait. I understand what people talk about when they talk about getting drunk or doing cocaine, or even I kind of could comprehend when people would talk about describe their things on LSD, and it made somewhat of sense. But when I started hearing people talk about this shit, I was like, how do more people not know about this? Like I had never heard anybody in my life ever talk about ayahuasca, DMT, never really talked about psychedelics beyond the idea of just hallucinating. I didn't know anything else about it. I mean, my brother had done mushrooms and acid, and he liked it, and he smoked pot. And I was influenced. Music, movies. I always loved people in that spectrum, the psychedelic spectrum. But it wasn't until I heard the more literal side of, wait, this is the death. This is potentially what happens when you die. This is potentially leading you to like alien beings and other things. I couldn't comprehend it. And to be quite frank, despite as many times as I've thrown myself to that fire, I still hardly understand what the hell else is out there. But all I knew was you could experience a greater sense of self, dip into some spirituality, rub the magic genie lamp, and just everything you thought you knew, you no longer know. And there's a whole nother world out there, and there are whole other worlds out there. It's just infinitely grander than anybody could ever comprehend. And I owe a lot to DMT. I eventually decided I wanted to, try DMT. I started by smoking some pot, and then I got my hands on some mushrooms. And then next thing you know, I found somebody who had DMT, and I was like blown away. I had more friends who wanted to do it. So I had a bunch of friends that I was doing it with, and anybody who wanted to do it, I was like, all right, I'll do it with you. Hell yeah, I'm down. What the hell? It only lasts like 5-10 minutes, and it didn't seem to really have any negative effect on anything. It was just an experience I got to have. And then the more difficult times you go through, breakups. I mean, I don't have a wife, kids. It's like, what's the big deal with doing? I mean, eventually it got to the point where I was like, all right, I don't know if I want to keep doing this continually, but I took that shit just like anything else in my life pretty damn far. And I mean, I had like a couple years where I was in the psychedelic boot camp, so to speak. I just did everything you could imagine, tried this with that, anything that had like unfathomable effects, whether it was ketamine or, pretty much everything you can imagine. And then my big thing was I wanted to mix it and try DMT while on other things. So I really got a lot out of DMT. And like I said, I've shared it with probably, I don't know, maybe 100 people. So I did it with pretty much all of them. So that is one that I got pretty familiar with and experienced a lot. And I actually had a psychedelic experience that was like, it made me think of the psychedelic athlete. And it was like, I had toyed with the idea, people were like, oh, maybe you should write a book on this stuff. It was like this secret world. It's like, despite the fact of all these things I put out there, there was a side of me, and probably the most, prominent part of a handful of years of my life, I hadn't really ever communicated. And to a lot of people, I was that guy that had never even drank, never even smoked pot, never done anything. Meanwhile, I was this person that was probably unlocking the door to the other side about as much as anybody else and going at it as intensely and obsessively as far as reading about it and having the ability to take on others' experiences as if they were my own and not just caught up in the individual ego side of it, like really, really analyze this from a bigger picture sort of thing. And yeah, it just worked out where I was done working as a strength coach at this high school, where I was involved with kids, where that would be kind of tough to be outspokenly the psychedelic athlete. At the very least, I'd want to make it a private account. And, you know, especially here in the States, in Canada, it's probably a little bit less, I don't know how it's seen, but I mean, psilocybin is, I guess, pretty legal, or it's not.
It's pretty easy to acquire here in Canada for sure. It's I think it is still technically illegal. They're talking about that. Maybe it's not true for every province. I remember hearing something about the BC possibly opening it up. Things like that are also happening in certain states, right? Like I think
Right.
Like some of your states have like they've legalized everything and people buy cocaine in a store in certain states now. But yeah, I think it's definitely lesser in Canada from my experience than you guys have had it in the States in terms of like how it's kind of looked down on and criminalized. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, the long story short with it is I was this person who felt like maybe the biggest thing that identified me as a person philosophically, spiritually, my, as far as life-changing things, it just, the most extraordinary moments, you do top 100, all of them pretty much are DMT trips, you know, or experiences on psychedelics to some extent, where I was like, man, you know, I'm not just this jujitsu guy. I'm not just this jack of all trades guy. I am if I'm anything, I am a psychonaut of some sort, or I figured I would just start putting stuff out there and have this outlet that wasn't, I didn't want to feed my typical friends with it. Like it's one thing you get into stand-up comedy and you share it to your whole Facebook feed, or you share it to your Instagram friends that has everybody you went to school with and all your relatives. But, you know, so I was like, I'm going to make this separate outlet. Instagram seemed like a good thing to do. And I made this psychedelic athlete thing. I figured there are a lot of people that are involved in both jujitsu and psychedelics. And there are a lot of people that are into that side of it. And I wasn't into like the festival side. I wasn't into like the party side of it. So what side of it was I in? I wasn't quite into I'm not really into like reading a ton of books on the mind or like psychology, or I mean, I'm only so well read in things like, you know, whatever, like the Alan Watts and the Eckhart Tolles. I'm not very well read on any of this. So what am I? It's kind of like a athletic sort of, you know, representation, and it was affecting the way I saw strength and conditioning, and I was getting more and more into yoga and all this. So it was, yeah, the psychedelic athlete just made a lot of sense to me. And it was the direction I wanted to kind of go in that Instagram account. And now it's kind of, when I'm out at jujitsu tournaments and when I hear people in the back, they're not like, that's that Mike Turpin guy. They're like, yeah, that's that guy. He's really into like psychedelics. It's like the psychedelic Instagram, you know, people like, they know it, but they don't always come out and say. Some of them are like, you're the psychedelic athlete guy. Some of them are like, you got that one Instagram. What's it called? It's like, you know, they're like, oh, the psychedelic athlete. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. You know, and
I'll never forget. You did one video where you like literally just come home from like what I can only assume was I know you start early, like most of the mornings you're in the gym at like 5 a.m. Sometimes you work during the day and then go back to gym and whatnot. So I'm watching that. And then it's like, I don't know, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, and you're hitting a bowl of DMT on Instagram. And I'm like, that motherfucker is a savage. But like, more importantly, Yeah, I've been doing podcasts for years. I try to keep it out of what I'm doing here, but like I've dealt more like conspiracy theory,
Right.
alien world. I used to work in paranormal sciences for a long time. Obviously, I do work in mental health, but I kind of have my own concept of what magic is, and I break it down into three parts, which are imagination, will, and conviction. And part of what makes me love you as a friend and as a man is your imagination is incredible. Like I saw that right from the day we met through your the way you have the same type of passion for martial arts that I do. So like when we were having conversations about like MMA fights coming up, I could tell by the way you were explaining it to me that you could visualize through a fight the same way I could. You could
Right.
look at a John Jones versus a Shogun Hura and be like, you know what, I could see John Jones opening with a flying fucking knee. You know what I mean? Like you had that same amount of imagination. And then your will and conviction is off the fucking charts, my friend. Like those are very powerful things that I think are lacking in a lot of humans. And so when I see people like yourself who embody them as strongly as you do, it makes me really fucking happy to see. I admire it, and I've been very happy to have you on here today and get to share your experiences with other people who may need some inspiration in that regard. Like this man that I'm talking to right now was a big fat fucking high school who went on to lose all that weight and transmute all of that into powerlifting and something that made him strong and healthy. And then he used his cerebral to translate that into something that he truly wanted. And the end result of that are these long lists of accomplishments where a sport he was only in for a few years, he became a viral sensation within, and multiple other things that he's managed to accomplish. So I think everybody can kind of learn from that. I would encourage everyone. You can find this guy at the Psychedelic Athlete on Instagram, and go check it out, because if you need a daily, you're kind of like, I mean, maybe I shouldn't put you on the level of David Goggins. Maybe that's blowing a little bit too much sunshine up
Yeah.
your ass. But at the same time, you're, because I know you personally. In a
Right.
way, you serve that role for me. So thank you very much for that. And yeah, thank you for doing this.
Dude, thanks a lot. The last thing I'll say about that dude is, you know, I was not just a fat fuck dude for a long time. I hated everything about my life and who I was, I really sincerely, there was not a thing that made me happy to be me outside of I just happened to know cool movies and cool music, but nothing that I had really done, or I couldn't get a single hot chick in my mind. I didn't have a vision for any of that. I couldn't kick anybody's ass really. There was all these things. And then life just started changing. And yeah, it's crazy. So to hear you say that just now, I don't often get told it back to me. So to hear it, it makes me really think that it's really crazy. Um, like you said, just a few years of time and the picture you can build and making life your canvas. But yeah, if you're struggling out there at all, or, it's weird how life can change and you can go from being something to the opposite, and being able to appreciate where you came from makes it all the great. Not a lot of people get to do that side of it. So I'm not going to ramble anymore about it, but yeah, I appreciate you, dude. We are cut from a similar cloth in some weird way. I don't know. We've got like the same Myers Briggs or some bullshit, but no way. There's probably something in there, and I appreciate you having me on. I'm sure we'll have more conversations in the future, and hopefully I'll get the ball rolling and get you on in some form of a podcast. But yeah, it's been great. So yeah,
You are a
thank
true
you, dude.
magician, my friend. Like
Ha!
in the truest sense of the word magician, you are a true magician. So yeah, I appreciate you a lot. And I think it'd be a lot of fun one day for us to maybe eat a couple grams of mushrooms and have another conversation like this. Put that
Yes,
out for the world.
I would love that.
That'd be a fun miscellanea type thing to do. So yeah, we'll keep that in mind. But either way, thank you very much, man. And
Hey,
you know, keep doing what you're doing, because you know, besides myself, who admires it a lot, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who see what you're doing and you know, build their own inspiration from it. So thank you.
Hey, I'm glad I got to share your birthday, dude. That's awesome. Happy
Yeah, man.
birthday.
That's awesome. All right. Well, bye everybody.